Good morning. Oh, that was good. We're going to go for a little more zest. Good morning. Good morning. We are so glad that you are here this morning. I know it's a Friday. Many of you have traveled long miles by plane or by car to be able to be here. Let me offer just the very first word of welcome for the day. My name is Catherine Smith. I serve as Assistant Dean for Admissions, Vocation, and Stewardship at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And you have probably been receiving emails from me over the past, whether it's past couple of days or weeks or in many cases months. This conference is, to my knowledge, something new that's happened at Vanderbilt. We have not historically partnered across the professional schools to try to do an event that was both for prospective and current students of the schools and for members of the broader Vanderbilt community. And I couldn't be more delighted that today is happening, and that's on a day of such, at a time, I think, of such urgency around the questions that we're going to be engaging today. This conference emerged out of a grant that is working across the professional schools. You're going to be hearing a little bit more about that today. But I will just maybe ask Carlin and Casey if you can wave your hands. Carlin and Casey work as fellows with a grant initiative called Trans-disciplinary Activist Practitioners and Scholars. And those of you who are attending their session this afternoon will get to learn more about that work. It's an attempt for Vanderbilt to try to think in a transdisciplinary way around questions of racial justice, which was really the seed and germination of today's conference. A couple of brief announcements, and then I want to invite up two of our sponsoring deans to bring a word. The sessions today are going to happen in a number of buildings across campus, and if you have your program booklet, there's a campus map showing where those buildings are located on the back page. There are also signs posted outside of those buildings, and there'll be volunteers wearing the same t-shirt that I'm wearing, staff. So if you get turned around, ask any of us that are wearing the t-shirt, and we'll help to direct you to that location. If we had, many of you might have on the back of your name tag the particular sessions you registered for. If you don't, that's okay. Let me just say one word. There is one session that is mostly full, and that is in session 2, the intersections of race, class, and religion in the era of Trump. That room is about at max capacity. So if you did not pre-register for that session, we would ask that you choose a different session during that time to attend. The last announcement that I would make is for those of you who are attending the Unconscious Bias workshop this morning, that's going to be happening in the Student Life Center, and the faculty from the Medical Center need to start that session as early as possible because they have a commitment on the back end of that. So if you are leaving here to go to the Unconscious Bias workshop, we'd ask that you go immediately from this session over to the Student Life Center. That session is going to begin as close to 10:15 as possible. I'd like to invite up Dean Linda Norman of the Vanderbilt University School of Nursing and Dean Emily Towns of the Vanderbilt Divinity School to bring our welcome for the day.
Catherine, thank you. And I am really excited that the School of Nursing is participating in this event and for us to have so many representatives of all of the professional schools. That the questions that you are going to address during this session, during the conference of the day, are really ones that are priority questions that we are wrestling with, both in our academic programs, but also within the care community that we work with. So I look forward to the outcomes that you will have and for you to be able to really learn, discuss, and teach us as you go through this day. So welcome from the School of Nursing, and we look forward to what you're going to do today.
On behalf of the faculty, staff, and students and alums of the Divinity School, I want to welcome you all here this morning, as did Dean Norman. Often my partner in crime, doing many things that help the university be better. But I can't go too far into my welcome without calling the name of Professor Dale P. Andrews, who had this in his mind before he died. And so in many ways, this conference, your participation in it, is a way of remembering him and his fierce determination that this world can be a better place. And it's you, and it's me, and it's all of us working together to make it so. So in that spirit, I welcome you. If you have questions, please do not hesitate to ask anybody with the Scholar, is it Scholar? Scholar t-shirts on. If you see me, stop me and ask me questions if I don't look too harried trying to get one place or the other. We are here to answer questions, to probe into the issues that we see before us, and to not be discouraged or live in despair. We can change the world, and it's you and me and all of us doing that together. So welcome.
Thank you, Dean Norman, Dean Towns. In the interest of time, I'd like to go ahead and invite up our panelists to come and find a seat on the stage. I am not going to do lengthy introductions because I suspect in the course of the conversations you'll get to learn a little bit more about them and their work. But let me offer thanks to Dr. Melissa Thomas Hunt for moderating our panel this morning. Dr. Thomas Hunt serves as Vice Provost for Inclusive Excellence here at Vanderbilt. And joining her on the stage is the Honorable Sheila Calloway, who is works with the Juvenile Court of Metropolitan Nashville as a judge. We're honored to have you here, and is also an alumnus of Vanderbilt and of the law school. We're grateful for your presence. Dr. Frank Dobson, who serves as Associate Dean of Students here at the university, and of course Dr. Towns, who you met just a moment ago. We thank you for being with us, and we look forward to conversation. If time permits, we'll try to allow some time for questions at the end. So we'll see how we do pacing, and thank you again. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. And I realized I did not bring my timepiece up, so if you would let us know.
We'll give you a 10-minute.
That's fantastic. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm absolutely delighted to be here, honored that I was asked to moderate this panel with esteemed individuals who you've heard a little bit about. The opportunity here in this particular panel is really to frame how the rest of the day will unfold. The notion behind the conference is that we are all here as individuals wrestling with our particular relationships with racism, and also in our emerging and often established roles as scholar activists, and how might we advance racial justice as we move forward. And so over the course of the conversation that we're going to have, I think it will provide an opportunity for there to be a commonality of language established, to think about how from different professional perspectives and personal perspectives we can all engage our scholar activists. And then we can also start thinking about what's Vanderbilt's role in the development and the nurturing and shepherding of students as they develop as scholar activists, particularly as they are pursuing racial justice. And so if you again join me in welcoming our panelists, we will jump in. So I want to begin with the first question, which is a really big one. And it's, what do you see as the most pressing racial justice concerns today in your field, but beyond as well?
Good morning, y'all. I thought about this question yesterday, and I was thinking, again, a big answer, which has to do with inequity. But inequity, whether it's in housing, whether it's in schooling, whether it's in opportunity, to the kinds of opportunities that many of us have had. And I think when I say that, and I was going to talk about this later, I think of my mother, who was a role model for me in terms of being an activist, but much of the work that she did in communities and through her church and the like was really small background kinds of things. And so I think one of the things we have to do when we think about those inequities that may happen in the schoolroom or may happen in neighborhoods and communities is the ways in which, even though this is not a macro thing, but micro, we can begin to address those inequities whether it's to volunteerism or other kinds of things, altruism even. But I would say, again, it's this whole question of inequity and leveling the playing fields, I would say plural.
So that was a much, much more scholarly answer than I thought about. You put a lawyer up with some scholars, and that's just what you get. And so for me, as the juvenile court judge here in Nashville, Tennessee, the biggest area of racial justice that I see on a daily basis is within our criminal justice and juvenile justice systems. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And I hesitate when I say criminal and juvenile justice because there's absolutely no justice in the system. And so, you know, I'm trying to name it and call it our criminal system and our juvenile system because the issue of justice within the system is just not apparent. If you go to the juvenile justice system or the juvenile center today and to see the number of youth that were incarcerated and what they look like, cannot be justice. And the same as if you go into the jails and the prison systems, it's so unequally racially injustice that's why you cannot call it a justice system. And so for me, it's a work that I have delved into from the judge position and work with. It's from beginning at least in the juvenile system, it starts at the initial referral, the initial arrest, who are we policing, how are we policing, who are making referrals from the school system, who are getting the most referrals, what do those children look like, and then how are we treating them once they are in the system. And so that's the fight that I fight every day.
What occurs to me, when I looked at that question, I just sort of walked away and sat down and got a box of cookies. But upon further reflection, it seems to me that one of the key things that I see from where I sit is what's going on inside of each of us. Those fears, those stereotypes, those hatreds that we sometimes dress up and try to not be who we truly are, but our failure to address the ways in which we get inadequate information about everyone in this room. And we go on the warpath with that information. And I use that violent imagery intentionally, because this is not a polite thing that happens when it comes to race and racism and all the other isms that always accompany racism. So for me, it's what's going on inside of us. It's, yes, it's the structures. Yes, it's the system. Yes, it's our history that we like to only know the good parts about. It's all those sorts of things. But I think when all is said and done, if we have not done the internal work of recognizing that each and every one of us in this room are valuable and should be valued and respected, not because of gender or race or background of any kind, but simply because we're human beings trying to make it through this world like everybody else. And so when we shy away from that or walk away from that or carry tiki torches away from it, that's where I see the sort of overwhelming background behind the question.
Thank you. Thank you. So we all know a little bit about what you currently do, but I'd love for you to help us understand how you've centered racial justice in the work that you have done over time.
Go ahead.
All right. Yes. You know, I did a session for the Dean of Students recently, and I kind of went back to when I was in graduate school at Bowling Green State University, and there was a miscarriage of justice there. There was a young black man that was convicted of something that none of us on campus thought he was. And Bowling Green, Ohio is not a metropolitan area, of course, so we felt very isolated. And the students came together, and I wasn't one of the leaders, but I was indeed one of the followers or one of the throng, and I guess that goes back to this question of being part of something, even if you're not in the front. And that went on for several years. If you Google, you can find out Paul X. Moody Defense Fund, and some of the reasons that we thought what was happening to Paul is because as the X signifies he was a member of the Nation of Islam, and we thought the university's trying to get him because of what he's doing in the community in Toledo. And so the interesting thing for me was that we were students and we were scared. But we realized, and I realized then, that we could come together, and that lasted for years. And so for me, that always said to me that even though you may seem very little, you can come together with others for a common cause. So for me, that was one of those touchstones for me of student activism in the real that I got to experience, and that stayed with me for years.
So I come to you with a confession that when I was a student here at Vanderbilt University, particularly as an undergraduate student back in the early 90s, I was not a social activist. And I particularly remember having a conversation with a fellow friend of mine, Mike Lee, who I respect completely. And at the time, Vanderbilt did not recognize Martin Luther King holiday as a holiday. And so we had to were supposed to go to class on that day every year. And the Black Student Alliance took a stand against that. And every year they would not go to class and they would protest. And I had a very heated argument with Mike Lee back in the day that said, I'm not protesting. I'm going to class. If I don't go to class, I'm not going to graduate. I'm going to class. And I look back on that, and I was maybe afraid of protests, and maybe afraid at the time of causing waves and not doing what you're supposed to do as a student. And I'm not sure how my life trajectory would have been now had I done the things. I'm sure I've been okay in class. I wasn't failing. I could have missed a class or two. But you know, I deliberately chose not to participate in the activities and probably got some sense of shunning from that as well. And I particularly remember as well that the Black students at the time at graduation wore kente cloths along with their tassels or whatever it does, and I didn't wear one as well. And in my mind, you knew I was Black. I didn't need a kente cloth to show you that I was Black. And again, Mike Lee and I it's me and Mike Lee in all these discussions, had a discussion about why would I not wear that, and why would I, and I just didn't feel the need for it. But I think over the time, you know, if I could have gone back, I don't know if I would have changed my mind or opinion of that and become more of a social activist at the time. But now, you know, I can't be silent on things that I see each and every day. And maybe that growth and maturity in me was, you know, I wasn't ready for it as a student. But now that over the years I have seen more and feel more of discrimination and racial issues, that I'm able to step out more on it.
Thank
you. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina, just across the state border to the east. And I honestly can't remember a time where I was not being schooled in some way, either by my parents or the larger society, about racism. It was necessary for me to stay alive. Even as a little kid, little kids were not immune. I was born only 20-some days before Emmett Till, whom I hope most of you know who that is, was lynched and mutilated. And his mother said, "No more children," and had an open casket funeral. And the two white men who did this to him, who admitted they did it to him, got off. And so my parents were very, very clear that racism is no respecter of age. And because of that, they would find ways to help me make sense in age-appropriate ways to think through my actions. I'm not a neutral body moving through space. In fact, none of us really are. But some of us carry the stigma or the challenge or the threat of the color of our skin. Some of it's around gender. Some of it's around sexuality. So with that sense of not being scared, but being aware, and now we call it woke, but being aware of the world around me, the ways in which I needed to pick my responses carefully, because it is not a certainty that what looks like innocence will be treated like innocence. So that just fed into my schoolwork. It fed into what I ended up doing as a professional. It feeds into my work as a scholar now and an activist, doing both. They are not oxymorons. And it brings me to the stage today.
So listening to the three of you, it's clear that there are different paths, different awakenings, different points of becoming woke in sort of the journey as scholar activists to pursue racial justice. That leads me to asking you, so when we think about the greater Nashville community and Vanderbilt, how can those two sort of institutions and entities create spaces where our students in particular can develop the skills, the values, the tools to really become scholar activists on racial justice?
Well, there are so many entities and offices on campus that are doing this kind of work, whether it's the Divinity School, the Dean of Students, Office of Active Citizenship and Service, and numerous other facilities and offices on campus. And I think one of the things we have to be cognizant of, when I first came to Vanderbilt in 2004, I started living on the Commons right after that, and there was a big sign in the atrium of the Commons that said 37203. And it had to do with the fact that the Commons at that time was looking at doing some kind of connection with the Edge Hill community, which is kind of different than the Edge Hill community now because it's changed some. But the whole notion was we are so close, because the Commons eastern borders on 18th, to Edge Hill and the projects and all that, we're going to do something. Well, quite frankly, we haven't done as much as we need to. And so I would say one of the things is we need to be more cognizant of those opportunities that are right outside of our door and really continue to not only seek those out, but one of the things I would tell students when we would do tutoring and mentoring, whether at Edge Hill United Methodist or Progressive Baptist on South 12th, is when you come to this community, don't come for a line on the resume. These young people have been rejected enough. Come and plan on staying, hopefully for your 4 years. And I'll tell one other story. I'm not as involved as I used to be in the community, but for 5 years I was a big brother with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I did some work at Edge Hill, at Riverbend Prison. But the interesting thing about Big Brothers Big Sisters is I would mentor these little black boys from housing projects, and one little boy was at Cameron Middle School, and he was always getting in trouble. He was hitting people in the face and, you know, acting out. Both of his parents, actually, both of his parents, his mom and his dad, were imprisoned. And so he's going from home to home. And years later, I saw him. I was at a program at YMCA on North Nashville, and we had stopped our thing. We had done it for about a year or so. And he came up to me, or was talking to people, and he was playing basketball, and I was going to a function, and he said, "That's my brother, that's my brother." People looking at this old dude is not your brother. He's not your brother, you know. And this was a kid who was, you know, being expelled and flashing gang signs online and stuff. But what that said to me was my time with him had stuck with him to the point where he was saying to these folk that neither one of us knew, "That's my brother," because of the time I had spent with him earlier. So I think, again, we have to look at those opportunities and be committed to those opportunities. And there are enough offices on campus that will help us do that kind of work. My hope is that all of us at this conference will talk with one another and talk about those kinds of opportunities, or you can look me up. I work in the Dean of Students office just upstairs because we can talk about those kinds of things that all of us can do.
And I have to stress what he just said about the commitment. You've got to be committed. And I see daily youth that come into our system who have someone that reach out and says, I'm going to be a mentor. And they mentor until that student does something that they shouldn't do. And, you know, linear progress is never linear. And for our youth, it truly is not linear. And so, you know, they make 3 steps forward and 5 steps backwards and end up 2 steps behind where they started. And then they have these mentors or people who are saying that they care about them that give up on them. And that sends them further back behind what they are. For me, what is important about opportunities, there are so many different type of opportunities within the school, within our community, that someone can get involved. But you have to know who you are and where you fit in. If you cannot devote yourself to being a mentor for a youth for a long time period, don't sign up to do that. That may not be your gift. When I think about my previous confession that I didn't do some social activism things while I was here, what I did do that I think was helpful was, as part of a sorority, we tutored every year for a small church in the Edgehill area that we helped young kids. And that was something that I could do that fit me, that I could commit to doing. And so in a way, it was a different type of activism, but it was activism nonetheless. It was helping someone who needed a lift up. And so you have to find that there is opportunity at every corner. You've got to find the opportunity that fits your skill set, your talent, and that's something that you can commit to for the long haul.
One of the things we try to do in the Divinity School is open up the resources of the Divinity School, both human and physical plant, to the community. That gets a little tricky because often the community is very suspicious of Vanderbilt, the university. And there's still a lot of work to be done in bridging that gap. But because we have a little bit of an advantage in the Divinity School because so many of our students and our faculty are already working in local communities of Nashville. So it's not an unknown quantity when the Divinity School opens its doors, but it's still a challenge because we live within a university and we are an institution of that university. So I see my job as taking whatever we've got and trying to give it away with some sense of not everything goes, but also being aware that when we have space and it's not getting used, why not have folk who need space use it? Do we have to charge? Only if people can afford it. That's not always popular, but I think it's a part of what it means to be a divinity school, is that we're not in the business of making money off of people. We're in the business of trying to work with people in doing those things that they believe need to be happening in their communities and may not have the resources to do it.
I think we started by asking, what do you think are the big challenges in racial injustice that are facing us? And rarely is it that there's one particular domain in which it exists. You come from different disciplines, different sort of spaces in the scholar activism realm. So what does it look like for there to be actually good trans-discipline scholarly activism as it pertains to racial justice?
That's a great question. I think what it looks like is, and I mentioned that I was involved with the SALT program in Riverbend, which was a group of people coming together, and these were scholars from Vanderbilt and from American Baptist and some people from the community, some local ministers, and we would come together and actually be involved in classes with insiders, as they preferred to be called. And that had a really profound effect, not only on the insiders, but also on the outsiders who would come on a weekly basis. And it was so interesting because since that class happened, there are gentlemen who were involved, who were insiders, who, once they got out and I saw them, it was like an incredible reunion, right? And so one of the things that I think happened is that those of us who were the outsiders came together and said, you teach this section, you do this, you do that. And quite frankly, there were times when we came together not simply to talk about a book or a text, but we brought in food. They allowed us to bring in food, and it was like, oh, food from the outside. Kentucky Fried Chicken. Yeah, thank you. And so to me, I think it's about coalition building and realizing that we all have capabilities and strengths, and we can bring those together across disciplines, across perceived barriers, boundaries, and the like, again, for the whole notion of making the world a better place. Yeah.
And when I answer that question, or when I think about that question, I think about the justice system as a whole, since that's where I live. And in my mind, when I became the juvenile court judge, I was going to completely erase the injustice or the number of disproportionate minorities that were in the system. And as the judge, because I had that power to do so, that I could change that all. And, you know, today I still look at the detention facility, I'm like, you know, 3 years later, why is it still so disproportionate? But it became a realization that I can't do it alone in just as this position, that it requires me to work with the police and look at how they're policing and where the neighborhoods they're patrolling and what they're doing and why they're doing it. It takes me to help work with the school system to say, you know, why is it that you're referring this number of black children to the juvenile system when the same offenses, same programs from this school that's in a predominantly white school aren't doing the same referral numbers. And it takes us to look at, you know, the Vanderbilt Hospital, who has the care team that makes the decisions on who's being charged with abuse and who's not, for all of the cases that we get, and having a look at why is it that when this kid in this neighborhood falls off their bike, it's an accident, when this kid in this neighborhood falls off their bike, there's some possible abuse, and bringing that referral to the court system. And so it takes a look at the entire system and working with everyone to say there's disproportionate referrals here, referrals there, referrals there, before we can all make a change. And so it has to be cross-disciplines, cross everything, in order to really put a dent in what we're trying to do.
When I was first looking at Vanderbilt, and I actually didn't want to come, to be honest. I was happy where I was, but I agreed to listen. And one of the things that caught my ear was the fact that the various schools of the university actually do things with each other. And that was something that I was yearning for when I was at Yale, which was my previous school, because Yale has a silo model and the schools don't talk to each other. The deans don't even talk to each other unless it's Dean's Council meeting. And I thought, well, let me check that out. Let me ask around and see, are there ways in which the engineering school or the nursing school or the law school or Owen and the other schools really do try to do things together. And in talking with those deans, as I was trying to make up my mind, there seemed to be a truth in that. And I thought, well, I can sign on to that, because to have a university that does not talk to itself is dangerous. And it doesn't provide very good education for the students. It doesn't prompt good scholarship from the faculty. The staff is scratching its head and looking at these crazy people that they have to figure out how to help things run on time and get things done. And so for me, it's just, I think in the DNA of a divinity school is to talk to other schools, to get engaged in projects together. the Divinity School is the first school of the university to desegregate. And notice I did not say integrate. It was a desegregation because the student who desegregated the school, the university, was not allowed to eat on campus in the dining halls, was not allowed to stay in the dorms. He had to commute in and commute out. And so only thing he could do was sit in classes and excel, which he did. So with that legacy of the restrictions of what desegregation looked like in 1953, and knowing that the university itself did not desegregate in the College of Arts and Science until 1964, there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen back and forth. And I think we're beginning to do that.
So there's already so much wisdom to be gleaned from the three of you, and listening to your reflections on your own experiences. I'd like for you to just take a moment and to think specifically about the type of advice that you would give to students who are really aspiring to be racial justice scholar activists, and particularly through that lens of, what do you wish that you had known as you were beginning that journey?
I was just talking with a young woman in Dean of Students yesterday who's just finished her master's degree, and she's one of our program coordinators. And it was just, okay, what's next? She was thinking about staying in higher ed and wondering if I should get a doctorate or a law degree, and we went back and forth, and I said, whatever you do, you need to get that terminal degree, and we talked about why if you're going to stay in higher ed. But more than that, I was thinking about the fact that for me, and I'm going to say, it's really about the question of being able to give back and being able to say to young folk, I'm here for you, and realizing that that's the kind of thing that happened for me. And I use the example of my mom, and I think, again, the model that she gave me was one where you're constantly trying to make sure that you make a stand and take a stand. And I'll kind of end my remarks with this because I wanted to say it earlier and I forgot. And it had to do with the fact that I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which, you know, you think it's in the north. But there was an incident that happened, and this was my mom, who was a voracious reader but never finished high school. Matter of fact, one of my sisters is named Daphne after the French novelist Daphne du Maurier, because my mother read French novels in translation. And this was a time when my mom took us to a Woolworth's. And Buffalo, New York, 60s, right? And she's going to get us some ice cream. And we're at an ice cream counter. And we're standing there, myself and my two siblings, my sisters and my mom. And we're waiting. And a white family comes up after us, and the woman behind the counter, who's white, waits on them. Another white family comes up. She waits on them. Another white family comes up. The woman behind the counter waits on them. With no other white folks on the horizon, I'm sure she's scanning the thing, you know. She waits on us, putting her hands on the cones, no covering, and placing them on the counter. My mom lets her do that. My mom looks at her and says, we don't want it, and walks away. I mean, and of course, back then, there wasn't a Black Power salute, but inside, I was doing this. Right? I was doing this. And I remember that because it's about taking a stand and letting people know what your stand is for younger generations. You know, one of the things I used to say when I was director of the Black Cultural Center, that there were times when we would do programs or do initiatives, and they weren't necessarily popular, but I said, you got to let people know who you are and what you stand for. That's why we're doing this. And I hope they come, but that's why we're doing this. And I think that's so important for subsequent generations. And again, for me, I'll never forget what my mom did, because that lesson was, you make this stand, you take the stand, and you do it, in her case, with dignity.
Amen. That was powerful. I got nothing after that. You know, the one thing that I would say is that I have learned over time is that you cannot let fear overtake you. And for me, it became my faith in God and knowing that no matter what I said, as long as I'm in line with what I believe his will is that I will be taken care of. And so I am not afraid to make those hard decisions, not to transfer a young black kid who's done a serious crime to the adult system just because I should, because he's a young black kid that did a horrible crime, and the media is going to be after me for not doing it. I have to take a stand to say, but this is not just a young black kid that did something very serious. This is a young black kid that didn't have family and structure and resources, grew up, on his own pretty much, and had family that was incarcerated or strung out and living from house to house and never had a fair chance. I'm going to give him that fair chance now. And I can do that because I don't have that fear. I know, the media might come and say, oh, what's that judge doing? I don't care. I'm doing what I believe is the right thing. Mm-hmm. And so as long as you know that you're doing deep in your heart, whether it's your spiritual heart or whatever it is that drives you, that you're following what you believe is the right thing to do. Stand up, take a stand, and don't be afraid to do so, because it will be all right.
Growing up in the 60s and 70s, there was a model of what an activist did, which usually involved being in the street, raising your voice, holding banners, and protesting. I had to learn over time that that is one way to practice activism. And I think you've heard that from us this morning so far. And so for me, a scholar activist is someone who refuses to teach, as we say in my discipline of social ethics, dead white men only. It's diversifying the reading list, coming up with assignments that put students outside of the classroom and into the community to see and hear and think and feel with others. So it's not just book learning. Being a scholar activist is also about speaking up in those spaces where you sit in a university or in whatever educational school you're in or in the larger society, not because you have something to say, but because you have a body of knowledge to share and provide new perspectives, a new way to look at something that may not have been considered by the folks trying to do whatever it is they're trying to do. So a scholar activist can, in fact, and often does, pick up banners and marches and is in the streets. But a scholar activist is also what they do in the classroom and how that classroom is structured, so that it's not this banking concept of education where I would get up in front of a class and drone on, and drone is the right word, drone on and on about something I thought was incredibly fascinating. And the students are like, please, oh Lord, let us go. But it's engaging. It's engaging students who sit with us in the classroom and realizing that they don't just bring themselves in the door. You bring a whole bunch of other folk with you, from your families to your communities to whomever. And so that scholar activist then says to me, I always have to be ready to grow.
Thank you. Thank you. I know that you must have a few questions that you would like to ask of our panelists. And so I'd like to turn it over to you now to pose some questions to them. Yes. I think a mic's coming.
I have a question for the Honorable Sheila Calloway. As a prospective educator, I'll be responsible for referring students probably frequently, and depending on where I end up. So I would just like maybe some advice from you as somebody who's involved in that system. What are some considerations that I might take?
So for me, and I'm working on a committee with the Metro schools now called Passage, Positive and Safe Schools Advancing Greater Equity. And one of the things that we talk about is who should educators refer to the justice system. And you should only refer those who are in the midst of something that's going to cause serious bodily injury to someone or themselves. Other than that, it should be a school discipline issue. Even your comment, like when, and I'm not going to age myself because I was 12 when I came to Vanderbilt. So I'm still pretty young. I was like Doogie Howser of my time. But anyway, back in the day when I was at school, there was a school fight and two individuals were fighting. They didn't necessarily go to a justice system. It got handled at the school, and whether they were suspended or put in time out or whatever it was, it got resolved there. Now, if somebody at the time, we didn't have necessarily guns or were in schools, if they brought a knife out, that might be that might escalate it to a level. But we get so many school fights, and literally, if you allow these students to deal with it on their own, the next day they're going to be best friends. And they're going to be back together, and here they are going to court. What are we going to court for? Oh, you remember the fight you had? We friends now. But, at some point, we have to recognize that our youth, especially our youth in the school system, are going to do youthful things. And, they haven't learned by that time appropriate ways to deal with conflict sometimes. And we have to work with them on learning what's appropriate conflict. And just because they don't show us appropriate conflict resolution doesn't mean that we have to criminalize them. And so that's what we have an over tendency doing. We get literally referrals from schools for food fights.
Oh my.
And that's what we do. We look at the petition like, are you serious? Are you kidding me? A school has chosen to do a charge on a kid who threw a piece of pizza at another kid. Yeah, you shouldn't do that, but you shouldn't be criminalized for doing that. And once we start criminalizing behaviors that truly are youthful behaviors, we don't criminalize every bar fight. And adults get in bar fights a lot. And we don't necessarily criminalize them. They get in bar fight, people break them up, go home. The bouncers kick them out, and then we're done. Why do we do that for our youth in schools? And so we have to start looking at, as adults, are we just trying to get rid of school or kids because they're troubled kids? Are we really trying to educate and teach them conflict resolution issues? And so that's what I would suggest. That was a long answer.
How about the restorative justice movements in the schools?
I am 100% behind the restorative justice movements in the school system, and I wish that all the schools would adopt it and make it a part of what they're doing on each and every day. It is so clear the schools that have restorative justice and have it wall to wall, where principals, teachers, counselors, and the students parents are all on board, there is a significant drop in the discipline rates, and there's a significant rise in the test scores. And if, a lot of the educators are concerned because we got to expect on the high school level, we got to test. But if you're making it an atmosphere that's comfortable for everybody, you're going to get test betters. And so, so what happens in the schools that adopt restorative justice completely wall to wall? Most of the schools start the day off with a morning circle. They take 5 minutes out of their day to not worry about testing, but when the students first walk in the door, they have them sit in a circle, and the teacher prompts the question, what did you get to eat last night? And they go in the circle, and they find out that Emily didn't get to eat last night. And so Emily might be a little anxious today because she's hungry, she's upset, and whatever happened that caused her, and not only does the teacher understand that, the rest of the students understand that, and we come to her in a better way today. You know, we learned that Frank was, you know, way out in his aunt's house, and the reason that he's late because his mom and daddy got in a fight, and he had to go over to his auntie's house, and his auntie got him late to school. Instead of being punished for that, we have an understanding of that. And so when you start with that, we're not only just the teacher, the counselors, the students treat each other better when they understand everybody's story. And so we have to teach more of that. Napier Elementary is one of the ones that we work with in getting restorative justice completely. We have family circles over there, dinner circles where the families come in and they are taking what they're learning from what the school is doing out into their community. And so when they have issues in the community, they're not going to fight it out, or they're not going to argue it out. They're going to sit and talk it out. And so if we did that more, you know, these kids that have these fights, you know, y'all come on in here, we're going to sit in a circle, and we're going to talk about why y'all fighting each other. Well, he said hi to my girl, and I didn't want him to. And then we can find out how ridiculous this is, and they can see how ridiculous it is to each other, and come out being friends quicker without any criminal justice involved. So yes, I'm 100% behind restorative justice.
What suggestions do you guys have for someone that's struggling? Like, I think you mentioned this earlier, Dr. Dobson. I'm a prospective divinity student, and I'm really struggling with what I want to do. Like, I know I'm set on, I want to go to divinity school, and I'm passionate about womanism and womanist theology, but then do I want to do a PhD or law school? Because there's so many things I'm passionate about, but I don't know how to find. Eventually, I can't keep going to school, and I got to find something that something that I want to do. But it's just like there's so many things that I want to help with. So how do I find something to definitely do?
Well, one of the good things about a good divinity school like this one is that we provide opportunities for you to explore that through our field education program, talking to faculty, talking to fellow students. Our students tend to be out in the community doing things. And so in that interaction, you get practice at doing those things that you might be interested in. And you've got, if you're doing an MDiv, you've got 3 years to really take in all the possibilities and begin to see what's going to happen for you next. I think it's really hard when you've got a whole smorgasbord of things you could do to hone in before you've actually taken pieces of what's possible and worked with them and worked with others with them. So use school as a way to figure that out for yourself. And also, you get to learn what you're good at and what you wish you were good at, but you should never do. I always wanted to be an auto mechanic. You do not want me working on your car. But I had to learn that painfully. But so it's getting that experience, and we try to fling open the door of possibilities for you to see what you might want to be exposed to, and find out, is this me, or is this something else I need to do? I'm not doing anything near what I thought I would be doing in my life right now when I was sitting where you are. But I had opportunities to test the waters, look around. I had educational environments that encouraged that rather than say you're going to do this and this alone. So you want to be in a place that allows you to explore.
Hi. So this question is for all of you. And I'm actually a high school student, and recently, about a month ago, there was a comment made that was just, I think, just frankly ignorant to an Asian American student in one of my math classes that I felt was pretty inappropriate. And I reported it to one of the headmistresses or deans of students at my school. And my question is, what is a good way to inspire and integrate an authentic awareness and way of life as a student, a part of a mostly white, affluent community?
I'll jump in. Last year, I went to one of the private schools who's a feeder for Vanderbilt, and they'd had some racial problems, and somebody there worked there knew me, and I went in and did some workshops and the like. But one of the things that the students themselves had done is they'd formed some kind of diversity group themselves. And that group was sort of my host. Obviously, the school itself, paid for me to come there. And I marveled at what the students themselves had decided to do. And this was a very, very wealthy school. I'd never been to a high school with this kind of campus. And so that would be one thing that I would say, is that the students there can empower themselves, you and your peers, to begin to say, okay, we're going to come together, again, across perhaps perceived differences, and we're going to then say to the administration, as Frederick Douglass said, power never concedes anything without a demand, and make a list of demands for change, for changing mindset, for changing behavior, and the like. So I would say to you and your peers, and maybe you've already done this, but feel like you're empowered to do something and take it to the administration, as I'd seen done at this other school.
I don't have anything to add, but just to say kudos to you for your strength and your courage to step up and speak out, and just continue to do that and continue to encourage the students around you to do the same. But good job for you.
Yeah. And I would stress, don't try and do this work by yourself. You need some friends, or at least some allies, because it's so often the case that when it's one person speaking out, they get isolated, they get labeled, and then they get dismissed. But when you get a group, they may get isolated and all those other things, but they can continue to grow. They can continue to expand, so that it becomes clear that this is not an isolated issue that's going on. It's a concern within the student body itself. And most good administrators pay attention when it grows to the level of a concern.
And just to add the kudos to you too, a high schooler being here today on the day off, because my high school is in bed. I couldn't move him. I tried to bring him, but he wouldn't come. Keep up the great work.
So this is going to be the last question, so we can get folks to where they need to be.
Thank you all very much. One question around how do we move from a monocultural teaching model to an intercultural model for current generations and generations to come? So in Vanderbilt, how do we create an intercultural culture? What would be some of the steps that you would suggest?
That's them.
We're actually pursuing that question right now in the Divinity School. And we have learned that one size fits all does not work. The needs of what that takes for students is different from staff, is different from faculty. And so we've come up, or we are coming up, with really a three-pronged approach for each of those demographics. For the faculty, because this is a group we're really focusing on in many ways this year, while keeping the other two groups also thinking, reflecting, changing, growing, is we approach it through the lens of pedagogy and what it means to be an excellent teacher. One of the great things about most faculties is they want to be good teachers, most of them. And we certainly have that within the Divinity School itself. So what does it take to make you a better teacher? So rather than, sitting down with a faculty member, as I do every year on a one-on-one, and say, you wrong, that's not going to help, because as any one of us would dig our heels in and say, yes, I am right, and continue doing what we're doing. But instead, opening up possibilities, opening up new resources, working together on a common concern rather than isolating folks and then having them feel as though they have to protect what they're doing as opposed to expand what they're doing. And what that means then is everybody has to grow. Nobody's the expert anymore because there's always something you don't know. So how do you integrate that within your classroom, within your assignments, within the resources you use for the class, the places do you stay in the classroom? Do you get out into the community? And don't just get out into communities that look a lot like whoever else is in the classroom. All those things take time, they take respect, they take energy, and they also take openness and a willingness to grow. But I find when we approach it from the attitude, this will make your scholarship and your teaching better, rather than this is something you don't do and you need to, it works a lot better.
I was just going to add, I actually teach a class at the law school here, and as a part of my teaching, I bring in practitioners, lawyers to come in and talk to the students. And it just took me probably maybe 2 or 3 years ago to realize that everybody that I brought in was a white attorney. And I thought, that's odd. Am I just wanting them to see the only black attorney they know is me? Or is it a pride thing? Do I not want to? And so over the years, and I think it was just because these were the ones I've always used, and I just will always keep using the same ones because it's easy to call the same person and say, can you come back? And so I have intentionally to myself said, I have to stop doing that, and I have to look further into the diversity of the practice because there are so many more people that practice than just white lawyers. And I have to do a better job of bringing other people in. And so it's like a conscious effort. Nobody told me that. Nobody looked over my shoulder and said that. But as a professor, I have to realize what I'm bringing to my students. And so I've tried to do better. I haven't done much better, but I've tried. And I will keep trying.
So would you please join me in thanking for these gems of wisdom that we've gotten?
Thank you.
Thank you again to our panelists. We're going to take a quick break now. Again, those of you who are headed to the Unconscious Bias Workshop, Jeremy, one of our student workers in Divinity, is just outside and is happy to walk you that direction. If you need any help with directions or where you're headed next, feel free to stop any of us outside. We're happy to show you the way. Thanks again.